Thank
February 17th. February 17th is the day when Libyans 5 years ago in Benghazi revolted against the Danish cartoonists, and 9 young men were killed there.
Yeah.
So they are, and by the way,
thank you.
The outsiders, it's the insiders who are making the move.
Yeah, that's a very good point.
Okay.
Hi, my name is Hunter Price. I have some questions about human development, which I would like to contextualize by noting that both Tunisia and Egypt have, in their major population centers, large numbers of institutions for members of the society to, for lack of a better word, express their creative side, or maybe, in the case of Libya, do something with all their free time since none of them have jobs. For instance, movie theaters, playhouses, museums, stuff like that. Stuff that tends to be foundational to establishing civil society. And it doesn't seem like Libya has that, at least not to a very large extent. So my question to you, Ambassador, is, especially in context of the recent QDDR, which places development kind of at the forefront of our diplomatic attempts, is the United States looking forward to doing anything like that, like the Grassroots Theater Initiative in Yemen, or some of the stuff that's been going on in Egypt over the last couple of decades? And my question for the US-Libya Business Association is, has there been an interest either on the US or Libyan side in kind of bringing in some institutions that might be interested in developing these type of outlets, or has there been an interest in training up Libyans to open some of these types of places, these outlets for, this type of stuff?
Those are good questions, and let me just note that the U.S. Embassy in Tripoli has made quite an effort to establish some kind of cultural programming. And they've had at least some initial successes. One of the things they did, for example, is they've had some events at the ambassador's residence for Libyan women, where they could come and listen to American show tunes. And it was a social thing, but a cultural thing, and made an impact which we hadn't been making for a while, and they had a huge turnout of Libyan women. Now that raises the whole question of gender involvement in Libya. When I left Libya in 1972, I had been there 3 years. I had never met a single Libyan woman, not one. My wife, who was a perfectly friendly sort of person, even spoke some colloquial Arabic, had met very few. Libyan women did not go outside of the house. They didn't do the shopping for the family. They didn't take the children to the doctor. When I went back for the first time in 2004, when I was finally able to travel legally back to Libya, it seemed to me I saw Libyan women everywhere. Now, I'm sure that when Secretary Condoleezza Rice went there, that she didn't have that impact. But for me, it was a change from no Libyan women, something that in countries like Iraq, where I'd served, and Egypt and Lebanon, women are very much part of the society. But they weren't in Libya. Now they are. And now they're engaged. And when we went back recently, you see them in government offices. You see them in private companies. You go to the Libyan Museum, and you see young Libyan men and young Libyan women having a very proper date at a cultural venue. They come to the museum. That's one of the places, if you're courting a proper Libyan girl, her family will understand if you're taking her to the Libyan National Museum. They weren't even holding hands, and this is a very culturally conservative society. But gender diversity is there. I spoke at the Libyan University. there's about 170 people. I would say about 40% of them were Libyan women professors and students. And they were not at all shy about getting up and asking questions. Now, they did sit on they tended to sit on one side of the lecture hall and the men on the other side. As I say, cultural conservatism rules, but as far as the government itself, the government seems to be promoting this kind of human development. When I left, I think this was right, we only had one university in Libya, correct? Down in Benghazi. Now there's half a dozen or so. Quality, I'm not so certain of that. One hears that the graduates of these universities need to have a little prep time, particularly in English language and other skills, in order to really do well in American universities. But there is a lot of this progress being made. So thank you for those questions.
Question for you?
I think it's a very good question. I'm not quite sure the definitive answer to that. I would note, I guess, two things that amongst the infrastructure development, there is a tremendous amount of construction of universities, new universities, and facilities for existing universities. So one would assume that would also include the ability to gather, to have new programs. I don't know what levels organized sports plays in Libya, but I think that that's something that is a possibility for the future. And I also note that Libya is still very much traditional in the sense that a lot of those types of activities are contained within the family. So even Libyans going out and hanging out at restaurants and cafes are not quite as prevalent as Libyans spending time with their extended families, and and that's reflected in sort of the very strong tribal affiliations that still exist in Libya.
There's a woman in the back. On the mic, please.
Hi, I'm Julie Taylor from the RAND Corporation. I was wondering if you could describe in more detail the Libyan government's view of free trade. So they've sort of had a bit of a schizophrenic relationship with that. They had the opening of the free trade zone, opened with much fanfare, sort of fizzled out. And then there have been, I would like to know more about their views on GATT, World Trade Organization, things like that.
Okay, just to be clear, I don't speak for the Libyan government, so I wouldn't want to represent their views on trade. I know from our experience and the experience of our companies, opening up trade is still very much a work in progress. And much of that has been, the driver of that is the need for infrastructure, is the need to rebuild. And I think that's going to be what the focus is, what is needed to achieve the objectives of the Libyan government for development, as opposed to necessarily what does it take. If you look at Saudi Arabia now, they're in the position with SAGIA, their 10 by 10 program, that we're going to meet these world-class benchmarks of global standards. I don't think Libya is there yet.